If you zoom into Morocco, you'll see a tiny wedge of land that stands out from its surroundings. This little bit of land is surrounded by one of the most fortified borders on the planet. Right outside the border, you'll find makeshift forest camps, where people spend their days and nights evading the police and preparing to rush the border, usually in large groups, with hopes of jumping over and stepping foot on this land.
Il y a des autres qui sont blessés, qui sont entorcés, il y a d'autres même qui perdent la vie encore, pas facile. Je peux avoir peur, mais quand l'occasion se présente, la peur, je ne calcule pas.
This peculiar scene plays out because this piece of land, while in the continent of Africa, is actually a piece of Europe. This small piece of land is called Melilla. It's one of two Spanish enclaves in Morocco, marking the only borders that Europe shares with the continent of Africa. Spain conquered Melilla in the late 1400s as part of its rapid global expansion. This region of northern Africa changed hands many times over the following decades, but Spain kept hold of Melilla. Even in 1956, when the colonial period was winding down and great powers were ceding their colonies, Morocco had just declared independence, but even then, Spain held onto its enclave. Today, around 86,000 people live in Melilla, and when you're there, you might as well be in mainland Spain. The city is designed with the distinctive Spanish architectural style, and residents speak Spanish. They pay in euros. You're only reminded that you're not in mainland Europe when you walk to the peripheries of this city to find one of the most fortified border walls on the planet, a 7-mile barrier with layers of protection. The first layer is a 20-foot metal fence, followed by a second fence with a flexible top, which makes it harder to climb. Below the second fence, you have barbed wire netting, strung in dense webs. Then comes another taller fence with a flexible top section and more barbed wire. Then you're on the Moroccan side, where you have a 6.5-foot ditch, and then a double fence with, you guessed it, more barbed wire. There are lookout posts, and every inch of the border is monitored by video surveillance. To understand why this barrier exists, you have to cross over into the Moroccan town of Nador, and then into the forests and the hills surrounding the enclave. These migrants are mostly from sub-Saharan Africa, and they all have different motives for leaving their homelands.
Les musulmans et les chrétiens ont commencé des palabres, des problèmes, le Boko Haram qui sont rentrés, et c'est comme si ça a commencé la guerre.
Pas de travail là-bas. Tout le monde souffre.
They gather in these camps and plan for the day when they'll try to cross into Melilla.
Notre objectif, c'est de rentrer en Europe. Voilà, il faut prendre le cœur pour partir. Tu peux rentrer comme tu ne peux pas rentrer.
In response to this intense security, the migrants have developed a technique that relies on overpowering the border guards with strength in numbers.
Donc on est obligé de se regrouper en groupe. Et puis maintenant partir. On se cache, on attend, c'est quand on est en groupe maintenant, on attaque le grillage.
The groups range in size but are nearly always in the hundreds. Most get caught right away on the Moroccan side, where they face border agents who are not shy about using force. Those who make it past the first few layers onto the Spanish section of the barrier are also thrown back immediately or detained. But because of their large numbers, a few will inevitably slip past the guards. As soon as they put their feet on the ground in Melilla, they are technically in Europe and are guaranteed certain protections under European Union law. But they still have to run 100 meters to an immigration center where they can be taken in and given protection from immediate deportation. Arrivals to these enclaves came to a head in 2014 when Spain decided it was finally time to double down on its effort to fortify this border. This was mainly in response to the influx of migrants attempting to get into Europe, fleeing from conflicts in Africa and the Middle East.
The biggest wave of refugees in modern history.
Hundreds of thousands of refugees fleeing brutal violence in the Middle East.
Cross over European borders by the hundreds of thousands.
Staying in overcrowded boats, many drowning along the way.
Spain's response to this migration crisis was to focus on the borders of its enclaves in Africa, redoubling the efforts to keep migrants out of this little slice of Europe. The year after the 2014 migration crisis, attempts to jump the fence dropped by 67%. Spain didn't make these numbers drop on their own. One of the things you'll notice when you look at this wall is that Moroccan military and police are also guarding this border. The year of the migration crisis, Morocco built these 2 extra layers of barbed wire fencing.
But authorities say dense new anti-climb mesh stopped the latest to make the attempt in their tracks.
So why would Morocco take the responsibility of building a barrier and standing guard at Spain's border? Turns out they have real incentives to do so. Morocco has what's called Advanced Status Partnership with Europe, which gives them economic and political advantages in trade and political affairs. The European Union accounts for more than half of Morocco's international trade, and the EU also provides Morocco with billions of euros in aid for security and development. So the Moroccans, in an effort to stay on good terms with their northern neighbor, take on the job of protecting Spain's border. And they take their job very seriously.
Ça, c'est la police marocaine, des gardiens de barrières marocaines. Si j'ai failli mourir, puisque ça, c'est un bâton, un bois, avec du clou à l'intérieur. Et le clou a pénétré dans le front, tu vois, ça a pénétré et on a fait une opération. Là, c'est la bouteille, il m'a poignardé là, tu as vu? J'ai eu une très grande chance et je vis.
Migrants had always had their forest camps right here, right outside the city on this hill.
This was their camp for years, and this is the place where they used to regroup and prepare to jump, until just a few months ago when the Moroccan military set up an outpost up here. Now the migrants can't return and they have gone to find another refuge, which is on a hill 12 kilometers from here.
Moroccan authorities have started routinely raiding the camps.
Parce que quand la police vient comme ça, là, ils défient tout. Dans le mois même, ils peuvent venir peut-être 10 fois comme ça.
But they don't deport them from Morocco. They have other, less resource-intensive ways of keeping these migrants from coordinating a large enough group for a jump.
The police were here for 3 hours this morning. They basically came in and stole a bunch of stuff. They kind of disrupted these tents and messed with these people's houses. They harassed the women in violent ways. They basically came here just to flex their muscles and say, you know, we're in charge, make sure you remember that.
About once a month, the Moroccan authorities round up the migrants and send them to other parts of Morocco that are far away from Melilla, preventing them from gathering in a sufficient group to blitz the fence.
On met dans le bus maintenant. On part nous déposer à Casa, derrière Casa. Ça dépend des villes différentes. Bon, après nous aussi, on se retrouve.
The Moroccan authorities are not concerned with keeping these migrants out of Morocco. They're trying to keep them from getting to Europe.
They do, in many respects, a lot of Spain's and Europe's dirty work with respect to blocking people whose interest is to cross.
Another thing you'll notice is that everyone in these camps is from sub-Saharan Africa, basically countries below this line. All migrants face extreme difficulties in their journey to Europe. But migrants from places like Syria have a much easier time just walking up to the border and asking for asylum the proper way.
It's not an exaggeration to say that hardly any sub-Saharan African is able to do that. They do have to resort to very dangerous methods like scaling the fences or hiding in vehicles or taking to the sea.
Essayé de passer par la frontière à pied 4 fois. Ils m'ont refoulé plusieurs fois.
Spain did build a new office to handle the influx of migrants, but not migrants from sub-Saharan Africa.
Al ver que llegaban cada vez más sirios, en marzo del 15 se nos dotó con aquel edificio de allá, que es la Oficina de Protección Internacional. Subsaharianos los menos. De peticiones de asilo algunos hay, pero...
Mais les Syriens, je ne sais pas. Les Syriens, ils traversent facilement parce qu'ils ont la même couleur avec les... Ce sont les Arabes et tous, ils ont presque la même couleur. Ils sont différents de nous, les Blancs.
You might say, well, that's reasonable, right? Everybody knows there's a war in Syria. So of course it makes sense to presume that Syrians are fleeing the war and they are refugees, they need protection. But the flip side of that, the presumption that people from countries where there isn't like a live war that you are reading about in the newspapers, the presumption that people from those countries are not in need of international protection is a very dangerous presumption.
The world is experiencing a record number of refugees and displaced people. While some countries have opened their doors to let these people in, many are responding by building walls. But this won't stop them from coming. No matter how dangerous the journey, the people in these camps will keep trying.
Tenter 5 fois pour passer. Mais si ça ne va pas, je me retourne à Rabat, je pars me reposer, après je reviens.
That's the 6th episode of Borders. I hope you've enjoyed this series. Today we also launched the on-site experience for all 6 of the Borders stories with graphs and charts and visualizations to kind of go a little bit further into some of these stories. I'm going to leave a link here where you can go see that, and thank you for being a part of this journey.